first meeting. The meeting is being recorded. For anyone who does not want their video shown, you can turn off your video. This is our first meeting of 2022. Calling the meeting to order, and we will start with general public comments. If you wish to make a public comment, raise your hand virtually or your real hand. I see a hand. It's Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
Once again, thank you guys for putting up with me. I actually look forward to your monthly meetings as much as I do anything else. And then this morning I got an extra chuckle from Krista's photo of herself as a young gal trying to leave home. That reminds me so much of my son, but he tried. But anyway, this morning, two things to reiterate. Thank you for listening. Zylstra Lake. Every time I drive by there, I'm just reminded of a wonderful, wonderful thing it is. And always people there hiking and doing things. And Jim Skog was right. I've only seen the parking lot over full once. And so it seems like you got that number of spaces just about right to sort of regulate in ways they use there. And it just seems perfect. So well done. The second thing about Zylstra is, of course, seeing that beautiful lake, and sometimes there's no breeze and a reflection of the clouds and sun slanting through, and you can hardly just continue driving by because it's so bucolic. But we all know that it's kind of an illusion in terms of health of that lake. And I, again, want to bring up how much I enjoyed Doug McCutcheon's piece in the paper several months ago now about the water quality. And I hope that there's going to be a continuation of that kind of series, particularly about the lake there at Zylstra, because as you guys know better than I do, when it comes to management planning, and hopefully we would back as public and you guys together in a room and things, there's going to be a lot of important things to hash out. And I am not, let's say, I'm not on the side of trying to restore things to some kind of a natural state, like it was back in 1851 or whatever. And so I look forward to those discussions, but I'd like to see those articles because it was so helpful. And I think the public needs some education on the issues there around that lake and that water. So the second thing is, as you know, probably there are a movement afoot with the county in the lead with some money for a potential feasibility study for a composting facility, commercial composting facility. Folks are working on trying to find a place where that might go if some nonprofit comes out of the woodwork, if. But I was just over at Orcas enjoying the incredible state of things at ORS there with Pete Moe and all, and just aspiring to have something like that if we can all live long enough to do it over here. And I wanted to say that it seems to me that not only could the land bank be part of a future, more adaptive and resilient future for our communities out here, with some parcels being closer to town being used for climate adaptation and for agriculture and things, but I would think that the land bank could be an entity that could use a lot of the end product from a commercial composting project. I would think that, just guessing, that your soil fertility, your soil health on most of your parcels that are arable farmland is probably poor to mediocre at best. And I know with your newest farm policies and things, and I totally applaud them, that soils have been a big part of the health of the soils, because that in fact is a restoration that I do totally support. And in the future become incredibly important. So I would hope that you would just think in terms that this whole composting project, as it will on Orcas and perhaps even more on Lopez, although Mr. Bill is doing fine there, that you will think about helping with the complete circle of revenue and purchasing some of that compost if and when things go in that direction, because I think you could use quite a bit of it, and I think it would be a very positive thing, and you could bring the soil fertility and health up quite a bit. And then when you go to lease it, at least you've got a standard, you've got a place to start with from then to ask lessees or farmers or people that are using that land to maintain. And I guess that's all I'm going to bother you with this morning, but I look forward to hearing your discussions as always. And thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Steve, for your comments noted. And I think we were talking last month about potentially discussing some of the things you brought up at our February retreat. So we'll be talking about that today as well. So thank you for bringing those forward. Are there any other public comments? Please raise your hand. Okay, I don't see any. So we can move on to approving the December 17th, 2021 minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes?
Yeah, Cindy, I have one.
Yeah.
On page 5 of 5. This is a discussion of the lease standards, and it's the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph down. Pardon me. Brian cited the mandate. And the last sentence says, he believes we should acknowledge the existing improvement standards, but should set specific standards in a lease. That should say, should not set specific standards in a lease.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners have corrections to the minutes? I have a correction. It didn't indicate that Doug Stramberg was in attendance. Okay, so with no other corrections, then the minutes are approved. And we can move on to chair and commissioners reports. Any commissioners want to report? Please raise your hand. Okay. I also do not have a report. So we will scoot on into our county council update with Christine Minnie. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Christine.
Look, it's my favorite commission. It's also the only commission that starts at 8:30 in the morning. I'll say that, but somehow you still win. Let's see. Good morning. Since your last December 17th meeting, it actually has been pretty quiet in terms of council business. It is always the last 2 years of the month that council unwinds from the year. And as of 2022, we have only had one short, rather ceremonial meeting to ring in the new year, where yours truly became the council chair for 2022 and Cindy Wolf became vice chair. And as I was vice chair last year, I suspect this is no surprise. But even though there haven't been many meetings, there have been some things, just a couple things happening in the county that are of note. The first is that we on San Juan Island did experience a culvert failure just last week on our Eagle Cove Drive, just short of the parking lot to Eagle Cove Beach. The road was closed for almost a week as Public Works replaced and repaired. Always so many thanks to them. They did a fantastic job and it is now back open. Denise Kolseth, who has most recently been the management analyst for the county, has taken her new role as administrator for the town of Friday Harbor, which is really exciting because that means that we still get to work with her cooperatively, but it is unfortunate for the county that she no longer is in her role with us. Either way, kudos for a woman administrator. The annual council retreat is this Monday, the 24th. It starts at 9. It is an all-day affair that gives both council and staff the opportunity to make waves about upcoming projects, priorities, and direction for the year. And I think lastly, I just want to say, I think I see Brian. I see Brian.
Hello.
Hello, Brian. As Brian is not holding an appointed position as of today, he will abstain from any formal decision-making process. Though as a contributor to an already involved process, Brian is certainly able to participate in the discussion as his input remains relevant and informed. And council will have the opportunity to make appointments at this Tuesday's regular council meeting. Okay, second, lastly, I was gonna make a joke about how nervous I was at this meeting a year ago, my first, and boy, how much has changed, but that seems pretty easy now. What I do want to finish my report by saying is that I just had my own bout with COVID. I'm at the end of my quarantine. I'm ready to be done. I would say that it wasn't harder than any other illness I've ever had, but it wasn't easy. And I just want to say, based on that experience, that it will be ever so advantageous if you are prepared. And for me, that meant that I had the good cough medicine. It meant that I already had food in my house, that not only that I had food, but that I had food I wanted to eat when I was sick. And that I had people that I could connect with if anything were wrong. And I had the ability to reach out to them. I am only saying this because my pure hope is to get you to think about being prepared if you aren't already. So that's my report for the day.
Thank you, Christine, and glad that you appear to be on the other side of that and on the mend.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next up, and we're ahead of schedule, so that's just fine. We'll go ahead and move to director's report with Lincoln's acquisitions update.
Great, thanks, Sandy. I do have a few things to update you on the Higgins property on Lopez. We are moving toward closing. We should be closing prior to February 1. And this will be on the council agenda on Tuesday for them to accept the deed. If you remember, there was some discussion about a caretaker lease, but the family is not, doesn't have anyone who's willing to live on the property. And so we talked that through, and that's not going to happen. It doesn't mean it can't, but at this point in time, it's not in the cards. So we'll be closing on that and taking possession. Fantastic piece of property. Can't say enough about it, honestly. So moving on to the Glenwood Inn property on Orcas, really no word on that one. Not heard from the estate representative. It just kind of sits there. So it's hard to say. I do know that the San Juan Preservation Trust is looking at applying for a salmon recovery grant to help with that acquisition. We're also looking at a salmon recovery grant for the Higgins acquisition, as well as an aquatic lands enhancement account grant. As you know, with going back to the Higgins one now, as you know, the future disposition of that property is somewhat unclear. We're purchasing it with the thought that it could be resold to the Bureau of Land Management to be part of the National Monument, but we're not sure how that's going to go. So I think it makes sense for us to apply for some grant funding for this project. If we're going to end up holding it, then certainly we'll want to defray those costs however we can. So I think that's it for that one. On San Juan, the two Hauschka properties, the Katy Mountain property, we're still waiting for a survey on the access easement. I should have that pretty soon here. I thought I'd already have it and be done, but they got held up by the weather. On the other one, we are holding off for now. There's a lawsuit that's been filed. This is the Hauschka property off Prohaska Road, adjacent to Mount Grant. And the neighbors to the south, the road passes through their property. They filed a suit against Public Works and against the Hauschkas on the status of that road and whether it really qualifies as a public road. So that's not something that we're involved in, and I guess we're just going to pull back and wait and see how that plays out. So I don't really have any more to say about that one. I will say, I'll add one more on San Juan. I am working with the Park Service on acquisition of the portion of the Canyon Tree property. This is the Roche Harbor Uplands property. They're planning on submitting an application for Land and Water Conservation Fund money on that one. And I should be able to provide you with some more details on that at the next meeting. But that's going to be a long process. It takes years, basically, for LWCF money to become available and spent. I think the good news is that the family and company that owns that property are not in any particular hurry. But we still have a huge amount of details to work through, and obviously there are no guarantees. That's about all I've got, unless people have questions. You're muted, Sandy.
Yes, a couple of questions on Higgins. Both are on Higgins. What is our So that's great that we're closing. Congrats on that. Very happy to hear. What is our plan, our immediate plan to protect the property and control public access?
Well, we'll need to be talking about that in the next week, honestly, but the way the property is situated currently, since they don't have, the family has not had any presence there other than someone showing up periodically. And it being winter time, we're not anticipating a huge rush of people to get over there, but we don't have any intention of officially opening it to public access until we've really had a good opportunity to take a look at the property and see how that might work. So that's going to be some time down the road. We'll probably need to talk through the access question and limiting access with BLM, since the proposed public access would be through the Watmow Bay parking area. So people would park their cars. There's already a trail which goes in the direction of this property, but then cuts off down to the south, to the rest of the BLM property at Point Colville. So I don't know, Amanda, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think I'd have to get down there and take a look. It's possible we would put a gate up at the at like the entrance to the property, because I think the road just dead ends into it. And we can post area closed signs and but yeah, we'll take a look and formulate a plan for that.
Okay, good. Then the second question goes back to the comment about potential resale to BLM. I thought that was essentially off the table for this at this time. In my mind, I'd like to see it off, and then if something changes down the road. But you mentioned that that's still the default plan. But we've talked about our hesitations, and we've had public input about that. So is that still in your mind as being a possibility or something that you want to see happen?
Well, I think it remains an option. The issue is really regarding the resource management plan for the National Monument and public comments that have been made in BLM's dismissal of those comments. But we don't have a finalized resource management plan. If we were to go forward with this sale, this also would depend on Land and Water Conservation Fund money. And that is a years-long process. So if it were to go forward, we're talking about potentially reselling in 4 years, maybe 3 years would be the minimum. So we've got a lot of time to see how the resource management plan plays out. We'll see who the new monument manager is and what their trajectory is for the national monument, how BLM is really proposing to change their management, or we just don't. There's so many questions that we don't know the answer to. So it may very well be that we don't resell it, but there's still a possibility that it could happen. That's not, in any case, it's not something that's going to happen in the immediate future, for sure.
And not without discussion and public input. Okay.
Yeah, obviously, if we started down that path, we'd come back to the commission and we'd have to go to the council also.
Okay.
So there'd be a
Okay.
lot of public input in it.
Okay, I don't want to scare people when that it's just going to be something that happens in the background and, okay.
No.
All right, that was it for me. So any other questions for Lincoln on his update? David?
Yeah, so Lincoln, the lawsuit with the Prohaska Road access, that I'm guessing that's like a couple years or something to play out.
I have really no idea.
Yeah,
I haven't seen anything involving the case. I was just informed of the suit by John Kane earlier. I think it was earlier this week. So I don't have any answers on it.
What suit? I wonder if they're talking about. I wonder if they're getting sued for something.
Okay, thank you, Lincoln, for that update. And we will, I'm wondering, since we have a public hearing timed at 9:40, if we should hold that slot and move forward on the other elements of the agenda. What do you all think?
I think it is worth mentioning at this time that that public hearing is on the draft agricultural policy. And because of staff illness, it's been a kind of crazy time. We don't have another draft of the policy at this point. So we'll likely be deferring all of this into the next meeting, but I think we can reiterate that when we come back to it at 9:40 time
Okay.
slot.
All right, that sounds good. Okay, so then let's, we're not quite ready for, since we're so ahead of schedule, can we take a 5-minute break here? Let's take a 5-minute break, come back at 9:05. We have commissioners and Lincoln back, so I'll call the meeting back into order at 9:06 a.m. And we will begin with the stewardship report. We will be discussing the Kaufelt Farm RFP, but do we want any other comments or questions about the stewardship report that were included in agenda materials? Any other updates? No? Okay. Yes, David.
I guess I have a question for Peter, I think. So I was over on Turtleback after the epic rains, and there was a whole bunch of the road washed out and the culvert washed out on Wild Rose. And I guess I read in the report that the culvert's repaired. I'm just curious, like, how did we get that all fixed, and what did it cost, and who did it, and how did that happen? And what remains? I mean, the damage to the road was massive. I was blown away by that.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. I rented an excavator last week and was able to get 4 loads of gravel up the mountain with help from Charlie Negretto. And so the road is repaired. There are some, structural issues that are going to need to be addressed. Some culverts up above that point that contribute to the problem each year. And I've just working on a contract with a consultant to evaluate all 28 of the culverts on Turtleback and replace many of them. But
wow.
So the road's repaired. Island Excavating replaced the culvert. We did that in collaboration with Pam Lowe and Linda Henry, the neighbors who are served by that culvert primarily. It's right on the property line. And we shared the cost of that with them. And the total cost of that project is about $20,000. I got an emergency or a short-term, not they don't call it emergency, but an expedited HPA, which is the state permit for for culverts like that. So we got it done in the deadline. The biggest bottleneck was waiting for the culvert. It was a large culvert, 48-inch culvert, and took about a month to get it.
Yeah.
But things are good there. That culvert was only 2 feet, and it was rusted out, and it did a 90-degree turn at the inlet. So it was not an appropriate culvert for that stream. But I think should be in good shape for the next, hopefully, 100 years or something. We'll see.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, good job.
Thanks.
Thumbs up from Brian. Any other questions about the stewardship report? Okay, then let's begin the discussion about the Kaufelt Farm request for proposal draft. I just myself wanted to begin by saying that I was just flipping back through emails and I see one from Aaron that said attached is the RFP we'll be discussing on Friday, but I didn't open it because I thought it was in the meeting materials. So when I was reviewing the meeting materials, I thought, there's only a 2-page request for proposal. So I guess I'd just like to make the comment that the meeting materials for the public and what I downloaded also did not include the full request for proposal draft that's multiple pages that goes along with it. Was that intended not to be included? Because I feel that if we're discussing something in public, that the public should have access to the materials that we're talking about.
What happened with that was the original meeting material packet that went out, the file size was too large, so I had to break it up until I eventually had a second issue with the file size being too large and found out what the culprit was. So it wasn't intended for the meeting materials to come in pieces. It just kind of happened when email was undeliverable because the file size was too large. So unfortunately, it got broken up into pieces. So I apologize for that.
Okay, and then so Tanya, it's not, you got a question, Krista?
Well, my packet of the materials that I got it that contained everything and the standalone. And my experience was the standalone wasn't complete. It didn't have attachment H or the financial statement form, but I think that was all here in the whole packet. Everything's there in what I have. But in the standalone, it's incomplete without attachment H or the financial statement form. So I don't know what you got, but.
Okay, so
There were a lot of materials that obviously came out with for this meeting. But I think as far as the RFP goes, since it's still a draft, our thought was that we wanted to give the commission an opportunity to comment, and then we'd come up with another draft, which obviously the public would have an opportunity to look over. But we weren't sure we were quite ready for that.
oh, okay, so it is not not intended. So just going back to that, Krista, when I'm looking at it was 33 megabytes, so that's quite large, but that's really huge. It didn't include everything. Then it was followed up, I see, with a different email. Anyways, so my mistake on not realizing, but I just wanted to point out that not everything that we're talking about is on the website, and wanted to know if there was a reason. So now I understand your reason. I'm not sure that I agree with it, but I understand why it was done. Okay, so we can begin then by questions and comments from commissioners on the draft request for proposal for Kaufelt Farm.
I might also just chime in with a little context if there's time.
There's plenty of time. We got
Okay.
time.
So, so we have a kind of a subcommittee, the RFP subcommittee, which was Brian and Krista and David Myland, and then we had myself and Charlie and Lincoln kind of in on emails about it. And it was the RFP, that the draft RFP was based on earlier materials developed by staff with input from the Cart-Kaufelt committee. So there's the draft RFP document that's about 8 pages and many attachments, background documents, conservation easement, stewardship and management plan, that sort of thing. But also the draft lease is one of those attachments. And the other attachment that was intended to go out here was basically a proposal template. So to try to solicit proposals that are somewhat consistent, we created a template. And so this is all informed by the Kaufelt Cart Committee, their input, and our own efforts to just come up with a comprehensive, transparent RFP process. So that's where we are at the moment, and hopefully we'll refine that as a result of today.
Thank you, Peter, for clarifying that. And thank you to those. I mean, it's comprehensive. Thank you also to the commissioners that participated. Any other questions? Comments? Yes, Miles.
Yeah, so I had a question about this is on let's see, page 5 under the general land bank responsibilities. It's the second bullet point, the reimbursement credit for 1/2 cost of organic and/or biological soil amendments based on testing. And I understand the interest in maintaining or improving the quality of the soil. I guess I'm curious how that came, like what how that number, why is it half, or what's the I guess based on soil. I guess I'm just curious about that, how that got to be there and what that means for the land bank, if that's our responsibility.
Charlie, are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm here. I can take a stab at it. Miles, that came through the CART process and the recommendations, and I'm not sure you were there at that point for it, but certainly a challenging figure to come up with. But it seemed like if you're going off soil testing, and the lessee is willing to commit to really making those improvements based off the soil test, which would have a recommendation for how much input, that might be a fair contribution, coming back from the lease rate back towards the land. And that can certainly be hashed out some more, negotiated with the lessee. And it might be different, if you were doing row crops versus pasture management, requiring a lot more annual inputs. So we could distinguish there also. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's also, well, this came up in the discussion at the commission meeting where Bruce was talking about, doing these amendments based on soil testing and thinking about his time frame was fairly short, like 2 to 3 years. And I think I could be wrong, but I think the LUMs were saying that, they look at it more as improving the soil is a longer term process because it's basically a geological process. So you're doing it over 5 to 10 years. And so I think I think it's a good goal, good objective. It might just need to be, I don't know if it needs more detail or not, but if there's a difference in us kind of spending money on it, if our goal is to change it within 2 years using amendments, or over a 5 to 10 year period using best management practices through farming. So I don't know if those details need to be in there, but maybe not at this level. I'm not sure.
Okay,
Brian?
well, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Miles, am I muted?
No, you're good.
I'm glad you brought that up. It was something that I had previously noted to the committee and to staff. And there is an inconsistency between that language in the RFP and the language in the draft lease, which we're working on, but hasn't come out yet to the public. The draft lease at the last time I read it said that the cost of soil amendments may be negotiated between the tenant and the lessor, that is the land bank. My comment to the committee was that I think that we shouldn't commit to anything anywhere near as specific as that in the RFP, and in fact probably shouldn't talk about it at all. So my vote would be for that to come out of the RFP entirely.
Is it typical for an RFP to have a draft lease?
No.
Is this draft lease? I'm sorry, go ahead, Peter.
I was just going to say, Brian, are you saying that you have not typically seen a draft lease included as an attachment to an RFP? I have.
Actually, it could be. Most of the RFPs that I've done have not concerned leases at all. So I don't know.
I think it's appropriate to include the draft lease. I think Brian makes a good point, though, that, we don't, maybe the specificity of that language doesn't belong in the RFP. I mean, there's a lot in the lease that is not addressed in the RFP. The lease is a much more detailed document, but we do want to give potential applicants a good sense of, what we're looking for and what we're going to require. But they will have, when it actually does go out, they will have that draft lease to consult, as part of their application. So it'd be easy enough to either pull that language out of the RFP and get more specific about it in the lease.
From the timeline that we're currently looking at, so if this is the initial draft in there, at the February meeting, there would be a second draft. Is that what we're talking about? And then after that, it would be released. So it would be released at the end of February or early March. Is that our current timeline? And
I would think so.
I think that our intent was to release it after this meeting, if we can come to an agreement on it. But with the lease as an attachment, I think that there are some things that we need to talk about still.
So, yeah, I would, for my own personal experience is being that I have not read everything because it came in different pieces and I didn't have them all together. So I'm not ready to vote on it. I apologize for not being ready. In my materials, it just had the 2-page proposal and I didn't put everything together. So I apologize for that. I haven't read the draft lease So I'm not ready to comment and move forward. Sorry about that. I also feel that we should allow public input into it, at least public comments related to it if there's, and without all of the materials having been put out there, then I don't think that's really fair. So I would say that we need to bring it back to February. And since what I'm seeing, initially we had talked about a letter of interest and then an RFP. But now we're looking at, just as I'm understanding, one step of putting out the request for proposal. Is that right? Not doing the letter of interest. So that in a way allows us a little bit more time. I feel like we need more time. This is a lot bigger and more detailed. I think it'll needs more discussion and more time.
I agree with that.
Krista?
Oh, I have a couple of questions or comments. So I'm wondering, did in everyone else's packets, did they not get the whole RFP with the attachment H? I did in my packet, so I'm wondering if there are other commissioners who did receive the whole document, then it would really be helpful to the committee if we have some discussion about their comments and concerns or questions on that document today, so that we can integrate those. And if Sandy doesn't have all that information, you'll have an opportunity in February to make comment. But I just don't know, but I don't know. Like I got the whole document, and I'm not sure who else did. So that's my one question about that. And then, so let's ask that question first, I guess.
I did also, Krista, so I think we should go ahead and discuss.
David got it?
Yeah, my meeting materials came from Aaron Tuesday at 5 o'clock, and it includes the RFP and the proposal template. I have a slightly, I mean, I want to throw this out there. This is a little bit in conflict with what Sandy is saying. I feel like this has already been done by staff once, and I think this is ready to go, or very close to it. And I would rather not delay doing this if we're trying to move forward.
Okay, then my other comment would be related to all this. If we are in a position that some commissioners can give their input so we can at least make those changes, that would be great. And in terms of making things available to the public, in general, I think practice has been, or in most organizations that I operate with, the board or the commission comes up with their nearest proposal on what we want the community to look at. They don't look at every iteration of every draft that we work on, because that's the work we're supposed to be doing. And then there's an opportunity with when we finally figured out what feels solid and well thought out, then we're asking them to look at what we propose to be the adopted policy, but their input is still going to be taken, but we're just not having, otherwise everybody should be on the commission and doing the work. I don't think having to keep everybody abreast of every single draft that we produce is necessary. And that's my personal opinion. As much as I do value the input from the community. So that's all. If we can talk about it today, that would be helpful, because we put quite a bit of time into it last week, and it would be great to be able to move forward a bit today.
All right,
Charlie's hand is up.
Yes, I'm just, Charlie, go ahead.
Oh, I put it up a while ago. I forgot. I was just going to say on the lease, the draft lease, really the idea, I believe, is just to put out our template that's somewhat customized to Kaufelt, to show a starting point and then negotiate with the future lessee from there. So it's not said and done necessarily, but we're working on it. And yeah, there's a lot of customizing to do with it for the farm. So just wanted to say that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to, I'm in favor of discussing it and moving forward too. Sandy, I think that yes, I think that your comments could be included later if you hadn't had a chance to cover all the materials. Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to do now.
Yeah, I don't want to be the one that holds it up, but I will pull them all together and review and give any written comments afterwards. Yes, Brian.
I just wanted to agree with you, Sandy, and I think if one of our commissioners, particularly our chair, hasn't had a chance to review or and can't adequately comment on it, it's fine to hold it for another month. I think you made a good point, Sandy, that we've turned it into a one-step rather than a two-step. So we do have some extra time. I suggest that we proceed and talk about it today and see where we get to. And if you still feel that we need some additional time, we can hold it over till next month.
Well, here's a thought. We are way ahead of schedule on our timing right now. It's 9:30. We know that we're not going to really have a public hearing on the draft ag policy. So if we were to take a break to get back on this written schedule, I would be able to read everything and comment if you guys are okay with that. If you're okay with taking like a half-hour break, is that completely out of the question? Would anyone oppose that?
I think that's
Or
fine.
20 minutes, maybe?
Yeah, that's with me.
I think that's fine. If we can move forward with our business, we should do it.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we'll come back at 10 o'clock and we'll be ready to go and decide our next steps for the RFP. So thank you all for letting me catch up.
Yeah.
Good.
Hey, Sandy, quick question.
Yes.
So the agenda says 9:40 for the public hearing. Will
Oh, right.
Tanya, somebody, as long as somebody, I'm happy to, I can't let people in, but if someone's available who has the capacity to allow someone into the meeting and just to be able to tell them that we're not actually discussing or having the public hearing on the ag policy, that would be probably a nice thing to do.
I can
I'm
do
not
that.
saying, yeah, if
Yes.
that's okay, Tanya, yeah, in
Yeah.
case somebody shows up.
Absolutely.
That's a good point, Krista. Thank you. And thanks, Tanya, for that.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, see you
Great.
all at 10.
Thanks.
Thanks for remembering the recording, Tanya. Calling the meeting back in order. And I just wanted to start by clarifying so it's clear what I see that I received and everybody else in the meeting materials that was sent Tuesday at 5 p.m. What was included was the draft RFP proposal template and the financial, like a form that someone would submit their financials. And it said, if anyone wants any additional materials separate, let me know. Then the next morning, there was an email with the separate material. What I took that to mean was that the separate material was already included in Tuesdays, but in fact, the Wednesday morning was the whole big package. And so that's what I've reviewed now, is the whole big package, and was just a little confused by it. Now I got it. So we'll continue on. I guess since the break was for me to review, I'll start with my questions. Okay, so in looking at the RFP contents, there's a table of contents, and then it does list the attachments. I did get attachment 8, the proposal template, and reviewed that. And right above that, the draft agricultural lease. I didn't see a draft agricultural lease. So is it supposed? It's not. Okay. Is there going to be one included?
The lease came to me in an email from Peter, and it was not intended to be part of the meeting materials as I understand it.
The committee hasn't gotten to the lease. We barely touched on it. Most of our time was spent on the RFP. And I submitted to Peter my comments on the lease so he could try to integrate that. I think Brian had given his and maybe Doug already. And so he was going to now work on integrating those comments and changes. And then that lease was going to come back to you guys next month. I don't think, we never really discussed it, but my impression was we weren't going to be attaching a copy of the lease to the RFP.
Okay.
It sounds like it can be done, but we didn't really commit to that, I don't think.
Peter?
So yeah, the lease is a document that, needs to be reviewed by the county attorney and ultimately, approved. We now have a version that has comments from the committee members, and that's with Charlie. And Charlie and Aaron Rock will work on getting that to its final stage. I did intend for it to go out with the RFP, but presenting it as the draft lease. And as Charlie mentioned, there would be some refinement depending on who applies for and gets the lease. But I did intend for it to go out, but I mean, I guess that's an open question.
So, yeah, I guess that was my thing, is knowing that it needs to be reviewed by an attorney. So if there is a draft to be included, it seems like it should have the big letters, sample lease. I just don't want to be held to anything. I feel nervous about including it, but I also understand why you want to give some idea, but I feel like that there's going to need to be a lot more refinement and discussion. Yes, Brian.
Well, Charlie mentioned earlier that the lease to be included was a generic lease, not specific to Gothfeld.
Okay.
And maybe the way to do that is to strip any specific details out of this lease and just go ahead and include that.
Just a very basic lease without anything specific.
Right.
What do you think about that, Peter?
I'd like to hear from Charlie Lincoln maybe, but I do think that potential applicants would want to understand, the constraints. And I think the extent that we don't include those constraints in the RFP document, they ought to be in the lease. So, I mean, I would defer to all of you, but I think that presenting a somewhat customized lease as a draft to be finalized upon selection of an applicant would be fair and would provide, the best picture of what they're applying for.
David,
Yeah, Charlie.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Charlie.
Krista has her hand up.
Okay.
You were first, David.
Okay, so my comment, which, I'm not a lawyer, but if we put the lease out as part of the RFP and then we find ourselves needing to negotiate terms of the lease after we've selected somebody, I think we're taking a risk. And I think we're better off either putting the lease out as a sample that's kind of like what it will ultimately be, or just not putting it there with the RFP. but I'm not aware.
Okay. Krista and then Charlie.
I don't have any experience with how this should go, but I think the way the draft of the lease currently stands, we don't say Caulfield Farm, but we give the parcel numbers on Crow Valley Road, Orcas. We do actually say it says Caulfield Farm. And it's kind of specific.
Oops, you just got yourself muted.
Thank you. Yeah. You're not the only one that probably wants to do that, so fair enough. Just do it. So the draft lease as it stands does mention Caulfield Farm and or at least the parcel numbers. It's specific as to the rent, although the first iteration was to the cents and we had that rounded up. So I don't know. I kind of agree with David from the standpoint of how do you make it generic enough and still applicable to the particular property, and at the same time convey that it's a draft and nothing is in writing except this draft that's actually in writing. So I'm kind of a mind to hold off on saying that a sample or a draft of the lease would be made available to something successful applicants or something. I don't know, but I'm kind of uneasy about sending out a draft document with people understanding, with maybe assuming that everything is done in there. So
Yeah. Charlie.
Yeah, so lots of options here. We do have the base template, which is, the prosecuting attorney's template that he's already given thumbs up on years ago to start with. So we could just put that out, and that has a lot of the legalese language. I agree that this having some of the specifics would be helpful if I was applying for a long-term lease. But yeah, like you said, we could send that out upon request, and we can make it less specific in areas. There's certainly a lot of custom aspects to this farm, and then it also includes photographs of all the buildings and whatnot, which can be found elsewhere in the reserve study and whatnot. So it's up to you guys, really.
Okay, Peter. Thank you.
I guess I would just say, at least as I see it, the lease in the next couple of weeks is going to be pretty darn close to what it'll be ultimately. I think there are going to be a lot of constraints that aren't going to change, and whatever refinements would be made would be probably fairly minor. At the same time, it wouldn't be that difficult to pull out all of those specifics into a single document and just say something like elements of the lease specific to the elements of a future lease, so that we could include the generic lease and just draw their attention to some specifics that are probably going to make their way into that lease. I think it could work either way, but I think we're going to be pretty close to what will be the final lease soonish.
I kind of like that idea, a more generic lease, but in the proposal contents, call out those specific constraints that you felt were important for people to know ahead of time. David?
Yeah, just what Peter said. I've gotten RFPs from San Juan County and from other places, and they sometimes summarize the requirements that you're going to have to meet, things like insurance or licensing or bonding or whatever other stuff. So they tell you what you'll have to be able to do in order to sign a contract, but they don't give you the contract form. So I think we could do something like that.
Krista?
I'm wondering, Charlie, when you're saying a generic lease, the one that the committee looked at has the specifics of Caulfield. So are you talking about a separate, really generic lease the county has that you initially worked from?
Yes, that's correct. There's a template you download and then work from there. So the one you guys have seen is modified from the one we've had going for years. And then with customizations for potential long-term factor. And I also want to say that the process for the prosecuting attorney to review a lease takes some time, as we all know. So the reality of submitting something now for review before then we negotiate with the lessee might be redundant versus having that generic template with an outline of responsibilities, and then have the final draft reviewed once we have lessee and negotiations are finalized, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Instead of asking prosecuting attorney to review our early version, just have them review the one version when we're actually under negotiations.
Right.
Okay.
Then I guess I would defer to Peter and Charlie. Peter made great notes from our meeting, and then apparently they disappeared for a while, I guess. But I would leave it to you guys to decide which ones should be called out with the RFP, so they know. Insurance being one of them. We had a pretty good discussion about that and some details there that I think it would help them, an applicant, to know ahead of time what the expectations are. So if I'm comfortable with calling those items out so that they don't have to wait to see the lease to see what they're actually signing up for.
Okay, that sounds good. So we can move on from the lease portion of the discussion. On page 2, at the bottom of page 2, overview of agricultural lease area, a tiny house for seasonal farm worker residents. So we had discussed that the tiny house was equipment. It wasn't included in that initial market rent study. Did the committee decide that that's something that should be just automatically included as opposed to offered as a separate rate for equipment?
Hmm.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Peter.
We didn't specifically talk about how it would affect the lease rate potentially, but we included it in one of the attachments along with the equipment. We put the value or the cost of the equipment that the land bank bought from the Caulfield Farm Stewards and the tiny house in that attachment, and had some conversations about how we might ensure that the tiny house, if it's used, is used for farm worker housing on that property as opposed to, a vacation rental or something. But we didn't talk about implications for the lease rate. We kind of lumped it in with the equipment.
You just got muted a little bit. Charlie, did you want to add to that?
Oh, just a thought that we could leave that open to negotiation with the lessee, what equipment they're wanting to use, and there could be a proposal to share equipment with community, like chicken processing equipment, whatnot. So some of that could be discussed in that final negotiation.
I guess I would just say that under overview of agricultural area, infrastructure includes a 2-bedroom farm manager house, a tiny house for seasonal worker residents. So it was clarified in the reserve study that it wasn't considered infrastructure. So I'm just not sure that it shouldn't be. I don't know that it should be called out there as saying, here's part of the farm and it's automatically included. It feels like there was going to be some more discussion around that. I know that I did some research trying to find, well, what would a lease rate be for a tiny house? And so I can share that with the committee or when it's time appropriate. Anyways, I just wanted to know how that was talked about. David?
Does the tiny house have its own electric meter?
It has, it will have, after we do the planned electrical improvements, not its own meter, but a separate sub meter that will enable it to be, the power to be paid for separately if necessary.
So a revenue grade meter.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that means to me that, I mean, if it doesn't have its own meter, then we can't really do anything separate with it, because the tenant on the farm would be paying the electricity there. But if it has its own meter, that opens it up a little bit.
Krista?
Well, two things. I'm not wedded to having that language in there, so if, because you're right, technically it wasn't identified as infrastructure. So I'm okay with that coming out in that particular paragraph. And I think quickly to David's comment is that currently there are a lot of shared utilities are kind of shared and are being prorated and kind of allocated because there aren't individual meters to allow for anything else. So once, as Peter said, I think the plan is when we do all the electrical revision, then a lot of that can be more clear cut, including the tiny house. But there's more than just the tiny house that's actually now on a, one group meter.
Okay.
Are there things on the farm that are on the main meter that aren't used by the tenant? And could they ever claim that there's power being used by somebody that's not them, that they're paying for? Is that possibly what you're saying?
Like the land bank office or? Peter?
We have multiple meters on the property that don't align with uses. And so we have a formula. We check in a couple times a year with the Sidney Caulfield is on the farm and the lessee, and we try to ensure that the allocations are fair based on changes in use throughout the year. But one, for example, is a meter just for the mobile slaughter site. Another one covers the land bank office and the farm stand. I mean, it's complicated. So we're working towards simplifying it a little bit, but we're for various reasons wedded to complexity there indefinitely, and we're going to just try to make the meters as logical as possible, and have these sort of easy meters or smart meters that aren't true meters, but they allow you to allocate use to the different buildings. We'll use a couple of those.
There's somebody that's got some kind of background noise on. I don't know who that is. Thank you. So it's Peter. It's complicated, but it's going to become more clear, simplified. Sort of, yes. So on page 3, at the top paragraph, it says use of limited farm-related equipment owned by the land bank is also included with the lease. This just goes along the same lines. I remember Doug suggesting, or was it Doug or Peter, that there's this equipment schedule, and would it be better to offer the package for sale or for lease, or that it somehow looked at differently from the lease rate, or who would be responsible for maintaining or replacing it? And I'm just wondering if to keep it simple, if you just decided we'll just include it, or was it talked about at all as being looked at separate?
Well, it's in right now, it's addressed in the lease, as far as I know, under miscellaneous equipment. Would you agree, Peter? That's the paragraph that the lease allows for the usage of land bank owned equipment. Leasee may use this equipment and is responsible for daily care and maintenance. All major repairs will be assessed by the land bank and will have the sole discretion of determining action And there was a question about whether we should have them, if they're going to use it, carry insurance for that, if it's damaged or needs to, something they do requires replacement or something.
Okay,
But there
so
was no
it's,
talk about charging more. That I know.
okay. On page 5, under general land bank responsibilities, maintaining existing infrastructure, including building envelopes, fencing, utilities, etc. So fencing, are we, I thought that was, do we want to say it's just perimeter fencing? I'm not sure what all fencing is there, but this kind of puts us down for all existing fencing maintenance. Is that what it's intended to be? Yes, Peter.
I think we could clarify perimeter fencing in that case. Would be my opinion.
I would agree with that. And perhaps any fencing, I was trying to find it in the lease, but we talk about managing vegetation around all the fencing, but perimeter fencing, and then perhaps fencing that we require as the land bank for our habitat protection or anything that's specific like that. But however they want to configure their pastures and stuff, I think that's something that can be done with less permanent fencing and at their expense.
Okay, so that does make sense, Krista, that we wouldn't only be maintaining perimeter fencing, but in fact, fencing of natural areas would in a way be perimeter fencing as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And then going back to the, it was talked about earlier, and now I see it in writing, reimbursement credit for half the cost of organic and biological soil amendments based on testing. I would agree with Brian that there's a whole lot to be delved into there in terms of what the extent of the amendments are going to be and how much and how it's allocated. And I don't think that we should right here put in writing that we're committing to half the cost. I don't think that we know. We may, it just seems a little premature to be needing to spell that out exactly. But I would say general responsibilities would potentially be to be monitoring. Anyways, just bringing that up as a point. I know we talked about it earlier. I agree. It feels like we're committing to something here that I'm not sure we should be committing to just yet.
And are you comfortable with, because Brian's correct, in the lease, the draft lease, we have soil improvements, and it does say that owner and leasing may consider a cost share agreement.
That's in a draft lease.
Yeah, under soil improvements, it says that the leasee will manage manure and compost generated on the farm and apply appropriate quantities, et cetera, et cetera. Should soils require further nutrient input. This last sentence is incorrect, but anyway, it says the owner and leasee may consider a cost share agreement with the land bank, with the land bank having sole discretion over investment inputs.
I think that's fine. I guess in terms of commenting on language in a lease, I'd like to have the language of the lease in front of me. I don't have that, so.
That's fair. I just wanted to let you know. There's something
Okay.
in- yeah.
I'm
All right.
comfortable with that concept.
Charlie?
Just to add a couple of thoughts, both on fencing and fertility. I believe the reserve study accounts for the fencing in the in the valuation. And so existing fencing that's in the fields that might need replacement, repair, I think should be considered coming out of land banks funds, or a collaboration with, land bank could buy materials and farmer put it in. Likewise with fertility, a certain amount of the lease rate is coming from the acreage. So considering where that money can be reinvested, I would recommend looking at soil, pasture, fertility for those funds, and that could be broken down based on per acre rate. What we're seeing in the reserve study. So just some thoughts there.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm not opposed to investing in the soils at all. I just didn't think right here that we should put what our contribution is going to be. Thank you, though. And let me see, anything else? Oh, okay. So on page 7, under proposal selection criteria and review, proposals will be evaluated and scored by a selection committee composed of land bank staff and commissioners. So do we want to mention, as we had talked about at the last meeting, we know that it's required to be consisting of land bank commissioners and staff. We're not allowed to form an outside committee, but we are allowed to, and I think we should, be consulting with, we had mentioned Brooke Browers being someone, and potentially Bruce Gregory and other agricultural folks. So I know we may not want to commit to that here, but do we want to say that? Well, do we want to reflect that at all? Just a little point. Or whether it's stated here, I just wanted to find out, does the committee still believe that we should be seeking some outside input?
I don't think we decided that we would not seek outside input. The only thing that was struck from there was specifying that outside input would come from the Conservation Ag Resource Team.
Okay. All right. And then the very next paragraph, selection committee will refer proposals and scores to the Land Bank Commission, which will vote to select or reject the highest scoring proposal. So being that this is a county council decision to, I believe it is, to select a lessee, we can make a recommendation. It's not correct. We make a recommendation, but they actually are the ones who make a selection. Is that correct, Peter?
Yeah, and in the timeline, you'll see that language reflected. It says selection committee recommendation at Land Bank Commission meeting, but it doesn't go into the detail. But yes, that's my understanding.
Okay, so then on page 7, it just at the bottom of that page, it just sounds like we have the Land Bank has the last say, but it seems that something related to giving recommendations to the county council who will make the final decision should be in there.
Okay, adding that.
And then the only other thing, and maybe this doesn't need to be in there, under the communications and proposal submission, there's the option for mailing the proposal or emailing the proposal. And I always worry that someone could email a big proposal that gets snagged and spammed somewhere. and then doesn't get evaluated. And so I don't know if we should just include a little line that says, please also CC Tanya, or let someone know, or recommend to follow up and make sure it's received, or something like that. I'd hate for it to get down and say, nope, you missed the deadline. Well, I sent it. Well, we didn't get it. Maybe
Could we-
that's, yeah.
Could we say something like, receipt of proposals will be confirmed by
Yes,
an email from the land bank, and so they
Yep.
know to watch for that?
that's the better way.
Yeah, we need to confirm that we got them as soon as we get them.
Yeah, that's good.
Tell them we'll reply within 1 day or something like that.
Acknowledged. Okay.
Yeah.
That that would conclude all of my comments about this document. Yes, Brian?
Yeah, Sandy, just a thought on that. Going back to your earlier comment about going from a 2-stage to a 1-stage proposal, it might be useful to us as well as to the proposers, just to have them send us a letter of intent with their contacts on it, just so we know how many proposals to expect and from whom. And that's a kind of an additional check on, did we get that proposal at the end of the time? Just a suggestion.
Okay. Does anyone want to comment on that?
Comment.
Link? Yes.
I think if someone's going to apply, they're going to need to talk to us. They're going to need to set up site visits, et cetera. So we'll know long before they actually submit the RFP that they're going to do it.
Okay.
Not
That
too-
that makes sense. Okay. So just to be clear, are we, with some of the changes we talked about today, this is getting refined, and then according to this timeline, is it, it says that it's getting released in a month, about a little couple of weeks, RFP release, so it'll be promoted. Yes, Krista and Miles.
Oh, well, before we go too far, so
Okay.
now I'm wondering, we haven't gotten input from Jim, or we have a little bit from Miles, and David's been chiming in. So I just want to make sure that we've
Oh.
collected input from all the commissioners. And then I would like to clarify what's in and what's out based on what the discussion we had, I'm not sure where we sit with the fencing comment, and I'm not sure where we sit with the selection committee, adding language about community members or something. So we just
Okay.
need to make decisions on some of those revisions, but I'd like to hear from Jim and Miles and David if they have more to say.
Okay, that sounds good. Jim has his hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I basically have no substantive comments other than agreeing with what's being said in a general sense, and I think that it's more important for the Orcas commissioners to need to bump their comments up in terms of their importance, just due to their greater familiarization with the whole process. But I just don't have anything substantive, but I'm paying attention.
Thank you. Miles?
Yeah, well, I had 2 comments about the attachment H, which is the proposal template. So in that, under number 2, experience and qualifications, like letter D, it has to describe their connection to a knowledge of Caulfield Farm, Orcas Island, and San Juan County. And why I think that has obviously some establishes their connection to the place. It doesn't really fit into any of the scoring criteria that's in the RFP. So the RFP lists like different point systems for what the committee will be looking at, and connection to knowledge of the farm is, or Orcas Island or San Juan is not really part of that, since it's already a long and very well thought out request for proposals, and a lot of information is being asked for them. I would say my recommendation would be take that section out, since we're not going to be using it for anything in the scoring, and it'll come out. That knowledge, whoever's reviewing it will have that information when they see the application anyway. So I think that's rather gratuitous or superfluous. And then number 4, under the tenant farm management plan, letter B, it asks for what their practices for resilient and sustainable farming, given there's climate change and possibly water shortages and changes in food systems, which I think is very valuable because that fits into our long-term goals as a land bank. But we're also asking them to fill out a lease for 5 years. Climate change doesn't happen over a 5-year period. Water shortages don't happen over a 5-year period. Food systems don't necessarily change over a 5-year period. So given that we're giving them a relatively short-term lease and the time frame of those long-term changes, I'm not sure if it's fair to ask them. It could be. I could see it either way, really, that how does what they're doing fit into the longer-term vision? But given that we're only asking them for a short-term lease, or offering them a short-term lease, it might not be relevant to ask how they're going to manage things that happen on a longer time frame. So I'll leave it up to other people to say, but my option would be to take that out as well. And those are the 2 comments that I have.
Thank you for those comments. Krista, Charlie.
And just to clarify for other listeners, it's initial 5-year lease with the opportunity to renew that for another 5, with some provisions if land bank isn't renewed and whatnot. So I just wanted to make sure others knew that potential for longer term.
And is that renewed based on only at our option or a mutual agreement? It's a mutual option to renew.
I think so long as they're living up to their end of the bargain, and we are able to support the farm as we lay it out. Any other thoughts on that?
And what about the option for adjusting a leased rate at that time? I didn't see.
That language is in the draft lease also, and there's an existing formula for that that's been used for some other of the farm properties.
Okay. All right, so going, Brian, yes.
This is something that I didn't catch in our initial discussion, but going over this again, I realized that there are 2 references in here to food resiliency and equity. One is under 3D, or I'm sorry, 3E, and the other is in 1E. And rereading that, I suddenly realized that I don't know whether that's a term of art or if it's just ecological jargon. I don't really know what it means. You know, when I think about farm production, it seems to me that those things are inevitable in it. So I think, you know, we should rethink that and kind of try to define it more closely. Or
What document are you looking at?
sorry, I'm looking at attachment H.
Oh, okay.
Again, 1E and 3E.
So your question is, should we define what we mean by that? Or I kind of like the idea of seeing what the proposals come back with. You know, we're sort of putting those ideas out there, describe any of these, how you would fulfill it, and then see what they come back with. Or are you suggesting to remove the language from there?
Well, it just seems to me unnecessarily vague and perhaps jargonish. I don't know. I just wonder what everybody else thinks about that.
Mhm. Maybe
Here has something.
maybe we don't need to have any examples and just see what they come up with. I'm not sure. That's a good point.
Peter looked like he was going to make a comment.
Peter, yes.
I was kind of on the fence, but a couple of times along the through the review process, Brian pointed out inconsistencies between what we were asking for and actually scoring. And I agree that there's definitely still, I tried to work through it, but there's definitely still some stuff that's being asked for but not measured necessarily. And so it may be okay to ask for that stuff, but I think he's right. We need to be clearer about what we're measuring people on or scoring people on. I mean, it's nice to have aspirational language in there, like you said, Sandy, to see what people come up with. But either we need to be clear they're not going to be scored on it, or we need to take it out probably, or further define it, I guess.
Krista.
I'd like to go back to Miles's comment then about that, the management plan and resiliency and sustainability related to each of those topics, climate, water, and food systems. And so this is kind of tongue in cheek, but it doesn't happen over 5 years. But if we're going to extend that lease for 20 years, do we give them a pass every 5 years on defining what their sustainable practices are? Like, I think it is worth asking the question to see what their philosophy is. You know, do you know what I'm saying? Like, whether or not they can do something actively that is going to show results in 5 years may not be fair, but to know that they're doing something that if applied over a long-term period, it would be making a contribution or not. But if we don't ask for it this year and we renew every 5 years and we don't ask for it, then we've let 20 years go by without having them, without knowing whether they're doing things that are supporting those aspects of the property. So
that makes a lot of sense to me. Lincoln.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, one thing that seems really clear in the climate change process is that the timetables keep getting moved up. Things that we think are going to happen 100 years from now, all of a sudden it's 20 years from now. So, you know, I think it's definitely worth retaining that.
okay.
Krista, you wanted to go back to clarifying
Yeah, so
a few things.
yeah, just so then I guess for us, for the committee, or for Peter and Charlie, on page 5, we talked about the fencing topic under general land bank responsibilities. So I guess I'm wondering, are we going to identify or leave it just as fencing? Are we going to identify, do you want perimeter? Charlie's correct that lease rate included interior fencing. But some of those I had questions myself all along. Is that fencing the farmer wants or needs? Like, I don't know about that, but I guess we just need to clarify how we address fencing as it sits in that particular topic. And then the next one, the paying half the cost, are we just going to take that item out altogether? I'm fine with that. I'm just curious. I just like to know what we've decided to do. Reimburse or credit half the cost of organic. Is that being deleted?
I would recommend deleting it.
Why don't I'd recommend deleting the part about that. the half cost, but I still think it's our general responsibility to ensure that it could be listed as one of our responsibilities to ensure that the soil is being amended, enhanced, or whatever terms you want to use, based on soil testing, and leave it open as to who's paying for it or how much they're paying. But
Okay.
still keep it there, as it is one of our, I think it's one of our responsibilities.
Yeah, I agree. So Peter or Charlie, like monitoring, assessing something is our responsibility in terms of soil conditions. Should be added there, I guess.
Sandy,
Yes.
if I may, I agree with what you just said in concept, but I think we have to take pains in this to be clear about what that responsibility means. Does it mean we're doing it, we're paying for it, or that we're monitoring it? I just want to make sure that that's clear in our document.
I'm not sure.
Well, I think I know what you're saying, and I agree that it should be in there. It's a land bank responsibility to assure that it's being done in terms of caring for our preserved property and for the environment. I just don't want to see anybody assume that that means that the land bank is going to do it or pay for it necessarily. So I don't know what the language should be, but something for Peter and Charlie to think about.
Maybe it's the similar language as what's right below it, coordinating with lessee on control of priority weeds and activities, protecting riparian areas. Maybe it's coordinating with, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Who's responsible? Where, I'm not sure how to address it. Peter, maybe Peter has the magic answer.
Definitely not. I think maybe Charlie and I and Lincoln can talk about this a little more after, but I mean, we have done some soil fertility monitoring. I don't know exactly what that costs, but it would, on some level, it would make sense to me that we would test the soil annually and then make decisions based on that. And then regarding the fencing, yes, it was included in the reserve study, interior fencing as well. And we're budgeting for maintenance. I think ultimately the value of those interior fences is going to come down to who's leasing the property and what they're doing there. So it may not be a factor. I think at a minimum, we will maintain the exterior or the perimeter fencing and the riparian fencing. And then the other ones, I mean, it just seems like there's so much uncertainty. It ought to be something we can figure out later to some extent. That's kind of wishy-washy, but I don't know. Charlie wants to weigh in there.
David had his hand up next.
I don't know if this is a useful comment, but this is an RFP and a lease situation where there's quite a few things that are not super tightly defined in terms of what constitutes satisfactory performance. If you look at how it's done in construction, everything is completely documented so that it's completely clear when something has been done right. We're nowhere near that with this. We're looking for somebody to lease this property in good faith and operate in good faith and work with us, and they're expecting us to do the same. If we're going to try to iron out every single thing that isn't bulletproof, we have a long way to go, and I don't think we need to do that. I appreciate things that you're talking about here. The fencing, the real responsibility for the fencing. That's a big question. I don't think we could possibly identify every variable that might pop up around that and nail it down right now. I'm comfortable with it the way it is, but that said, it's a fairly loose agreement that calls on people to operate in good faith.
Okay. Thank you. Krista?
Well, regarding the fencing quickly, I think, I don't have that reserve study in front of me right now, but I think a lot of that perimeter expense over the course of 10 years was not that substantive, as I recall, but I could be wrong about that. I think the major expenses were in areas that the land bank would be responsible for. So as time goes on and the time to comes to replace it, all the fences aren't getting replaced in the first year. They're all spread out through that 10-year period. So there is room for discussion on what the farmer at the time needs, I suppose. So I guess that's what I would say about that. But in the lease agreement, which I know you don't have, but there is a discussion in two places, the soil improvements, and then it comes up again, where I just had that. It's talking about best practices, basically what we expect from them under farming practices. We do ask for a farm plan, which I think is intended to find out what their practices are. Are they such that they will help to at least maintain or add to the soil quality through farming practices, and if need be by amendments? And then there's another paragraph under utilizing best practices, which refers to soil quality and fertility and nutrient management plans. And there's different things that we're asking them to be, their practices to be in support of, or in, what's the word I want, in following, criteria or instructions set out by other plans, best practices documents. And so I think that's a way that we're helping to monitor. We're not setting qualitative numbers on soil yet in the document, but we are making them accountable, or our expectation is that their practices will be in step with some of these documents. So to me, that's a way of starting to identify what we're looking for and what their expectation is going to be, I guess, for them. So I can just add, so we'll add something about soil amendments, and then under proposal criteria, do we want to add language that it will be, the committee's comprised of staff, commissioners, and selected community members, or however, some kind of language to reflect that we will be engaging someone? And do we want to identify the ag community, farming community, whatever?
I personally think it's okay to leave it just like it is, because the actual committee can only be consisted of land bank. My question was to the committee of what your intentions were.
Okay. And then the second paragraph there is, do we need language? You wanted clarification that the actual final decision, the committee is going to refer the high-ranking applicant to the commission, and the commission is going to send that on, but the final decision rests with the council. Did we want language? Did you want clarifying language in there about that?
I think that, let's see, proposal selection criteria. It feels to me it should be clear that the county council makes the final decision.
Okay. And then on attachment H, there was the question on those two, the equitable access and food resiliency that shows up. I'm just bringing that back because I didn't hear that we confirmed taking that in or out. And we can leave it to Charlie and Peter to decide what they want to do or what that means.
I think leave it to Charlie, Peter, and the committee to decide. Yeah, I think it's a good point to re-question what's being measured. Yes, Brian.
Yeah, I was only trying to suggest that we try to define more exactly what we mean. Because I don't understand what we mean.
Yeah. And then under 2, experience and qualifications, Miles asked to have D removed. that their knowledge of Kaufeld, Orcas and San Juan County, that was in there before, and we got rid of Pacific Northwest, but we didn't take everybody else out. So I just want to know whether it's in or out.
Charlie?
One thought is that it could be useful just in initial review. It'll come to the forefront before that, as far as giving farm tours and having an idea of what people already know about the farm and the area. So I can go either way on that.
It is kind of
and
one of
just,
the, oh, go ahead.
Oh, not to belabor the fence and soils, but wanted to say that also being a semi-short-term lease, an investment in fencing by a lessee would be, it'll extend way past their lease term. So, it is pretty common to invest in materials and go about it in that way if it's a mutually beneficial endeavor. And soil-wise amendments, we could try and get to a point where we agree on a annual number that we're willing to go up to, that's kind of reflected based on the annual income from the lease. We're willing to match up to a certain $1,000 of dollars. Just an idea.
If we're using, if the farmer is using on farm composted products, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's outside amendments. You know what? It's probably getting too much into the weeds. I defer to you. You guys are doing great. Defer to Charlie and Peter. Brian?
I agree. It's too far into the weeds, certainly for the RFP. Those are matters to be negotiated and potentially put in the lease itself, but not now. But to Krista's original point about Miles' original point about knowledge of Kaufeld Farms, San Juan County, et cetera, I think that we're supplying with the RFP plenty of background materials on the farm and most particularly the reserve study. So every applicant will have some knowledge and pardon me. I think it's probably redundant to ask that question. It doesn't have a lot of meaning. So I agree with Miles, we should take it out.
Okay,
Sounds good.
Does that sound good? Yeah, to me, it kind of, I remember we talked about this, and it smacks of the litmus test of how long have you lived here? Oh, how long have you lived here? And does that make you a better or worse resident by your longevity? And if you're asking them what they know, and if we're not going to use as a criteria, someone from outside may be a perfectly acceptable candidate, and we don't want to not consider them just because they've never lived here. So I think you'd have to be careful about that. Okay, well, I think that's all I was just making sure that Peter has what he needs, and whether or not now we can make a decision on this document, assuming that those revisions will be made, or do we bring it back in February?
Peter or Charlie, what are your thoughts? Are you comfortable with making adjustments based on what we've talked about today?
I think Charlie's primarily leading it from here, but I'm comfortable. Charlie?
Yeah, I think we can take it from here.
Okay, and so is the intent that it will be released prior to the next land bank meeting? It says February 14th. Is that what you're intending?
Valentine's Day. Yeah, we can aim for that.
Okay.
with your blessing.
Brian?
I think, pardon me again, I would like to see one more revised draft to the committee, or at least to me, before it goes out.
When's our next meeting? What's the date of that? Is that the 20? I don't have my calendar.
It is,
It's like the 18th.
Oh, he beat me to it. 18th.
it's the 18th. So is there, since it's only since this only says a few days before that, is there an issue with having the whole final included in the meeting materials for the 18th? And so that it can get the final stamp of approval, and we can hear if there's any public comments that completely change something. What do you think?
I think that'd be great.
Okay,
Yeah, no problem.
okay, because we're good on timeline.
Yeah.
We've got a little
So-
breathing room, so. What was that? Were you saying something else, Krista? No.
No, I just said we're so close, you know.
We're-
18th
It's so
was perfect.
close,
Yeah.
so let's just do it like that. Okay. All right, so we're wrapping up this portion of the meeting. Tanya, can you give us a brief outreach and volunteer report?
Sure. I'm starting to add items to the calendar. That's really feels great. Amanda has some bird watching coming up in January, February, March. There's beach cleanups, work parties, and then kind of working on getting the whole master calendar together so that I can get that out to the communications committee. Everyone's had such great ideas. And I would like to give a shout out to Shauna and I think Jacob too, because they both mentored some San Juan Island High School students who had a junior project. They have a class the kids need for graduation. And there was a write-up in the paper that just came out yesterday, or the 19th, today's the 21st. So a bunch of willows were planted under their mentorship. Maybe we'll have 2 more conservationists out there graduating, but pretty cool.
Great. That is cool. Yes,
Yeah.
great. Okay, so that wraps that up. So the calendar, just for anyone who doesn't know, these would be calendar of public events that would range from planting to educational events. I forget what all is included, but there's quite a variety. Each district came up with a list of ideas and proposed months, and there's quite a lot planned. So that calendar will be available on our website, is that right? And then the different events will be announced in the local media and our newsletter. Okay, great. That's exciting. Okay, future agenda items, February meeting retreat topics. Are we planning on a retreat after the February 18th meeting?
That's the
Lincoln?
current plan, yes.
That's the current plan?
Yep.
Okay, so to block the day for the 18th and
Sandy, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
So I think I'm going to be at a training in Indianapolis on the 18th. That goes until about 3 p.m. So if we have it, I would not be able to attend. I don't know if I want to postpone it until later, but I would not be able to attend that day.
okay,
I'm probably in the same position. Gonna be out of state on that day.
okay. All right, well, that's important. Sounds to me like maybe we need to pick a different date. Maybe we can do that by email. What do you think, Lincoln?
Yeah, let's try it by email. I don't know how everyone is, what their availability is for the March meeting. People know that.
So is the typical is to hold it directly after? Do we want to?
That's the easiest thing, because
It's-
people are typically available that day.
Okay, so maybe we could just have a little brief thought. One of my thoughts might be that we consider seeing if there's a different date, and then we are not worn out from an early morning Zoom meeting, because it's different than an in-person meeting. It takes a different type of attention level to stay on this screen and feel engaged. So I just maybe put that out there, that we consider having it on a different day. I know that could be harder for schedules, but what do people think about that?
I think that'd be good.
You want to shoot for after the 18th, but before the beginning of March?
Yeah, sure. Like you want to keep it on a Friday, like the 25th of February?
Yeah, so Miles and David, would that work for you on Friday, the 25th? Potentially.
Yeah,
That's good
And
for me.
it would.
And it might be better for them to have a half day, something that takes a half day instead of a full day of work. Maybe it works better that way. What about everybody else? The 25th?
Good for me.
Sounds good.
I'll check with our facilitator.
Okay, so, and then that would be either an afternoon or a morning. So it's not a 7-hour meeting, it's like a 4-hour. Okay,
That sounds
all
good.
right. So pencil it on your calendars. And then as far as the topic, one thing we talked about last meeting, and we've talked about a few times, is getting focused on climate change, just deep diving into climate change. And one of the subjects that has been brought up by Steve Olvey a number of times is the consideration of how our mandate might be interpreted more broadly to benefit the community in other areas of resilience. And we've received that comment a few times, but we haven't explored it. And so I think there would be a number of aspects that we could look at through the lens of climate change and fill out a meeting on that, but I'm open to ideas. David and Brian?
I think that's a good topic, and I think Steve isn't the only person who's given us that comment.
Brian? Oops, you're cutting out.
The way I'm understanding them, they might represent a major change in the way we look at acquiring and using land bank preserves. So if we discuss that, I think it's a big topic, and I'd like to have some kind of a staff comment for us to go on.
That's a good point. What if, for example, if Lincoln feels in a legal interpretation that something like that is not even able to be contemplated, then we may be spending a day talking about something that isn't possible. And I don't know if staff is ready to comment right now.
It just depends on the degree. One of the things that Steve brought up this morning was a commercial composting facility. I think that would be extremely difficult for us to do, quite frankly. That's very different. It's almost an industrial operation. So it's really about the degree to which you're looking to change things.
I was thinking he meant not that we would be operating it, but that we would be able to use land bank funds to
Yeah.
secure. Okay.
Yeah, that
Any of
would
it.
be, that's no problem. I just
Okay.
want to kind of short circuit that idea, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're not. Brian,
I think the question, though, inherent in that is, does the land bank want to become the general land acquisition arm of San Juan County? Is that our job?
That would be part of that discussion.
Yeah. But I'd like some staff guidance.
No.
Okay, thank you.
I have a
I
question.
thought that was the answer.
yes. Well, before we go to Krista, Charlie, did you have something to respond to?
Yeah, I guess just some context. I think the compost facility has been discussed in a lot of different circles, but coming from the egg world, it's a major need, having local fertility, and then also a resource opportunity with all the forest management and thinning and biochar, and Lopez has a great example on a private land at David and Faith's farm. But I think there's a lot of potential for that to be a major conservation-based resource for the community. And my interpretation of Steve's comments were, the potential maybe for a land bank to own a property and support it in that way, but also that we would benefit greatly from that resource for fertility management on properties, and also a place to take material coming from our other properties. So I think it could be really, really interesting conversation to keep going, and brings a lot of different sectors together.
Great. Krista?
The other topic I was interested in, but we may not, if we're only going to do 4 hours or 5 hours. But I would like to learn more about the whole JEDI group and the work that they're doing. Like, how is that? I need to learn more about what we're doing in that regard as an organization and what that actually looks like and means. And so when I hear about it, I have a concept of all that. And I think it would be good information for the commission to be familiar with. And it wouldn't take a whole retreat time, but more than a 15-minute presentation probably. So
I think that's an important topic as well. So whether or not it could be, we typically do more than one topic? Is that right, Lincoln, in these
We can.
retreats?
Yep.
We can. All right.
I would, I'd also offer up that probably, or perhaps in the context of climate change, we are going to have a staff retreat at the end of this month. And one of the topics we'll be discussing is whether we've reached kind of an inflection point in terms of properties that we acquire, that we have a lot of public access properties, and we're providing a lot of public access to the community. Are we at the point where our focus should change to look at acquiring properties that are more geared around maintaining ecological integrity or dealing with climate change?
Mhm. I'm glad to hear that you'll be talking about that. I think that's, and so then that's part of a staff retreat or staff meeting, and then you could bring that to us for our retreat and kind of kick off. Okay, that sounds great. I don't know how to get my thumb down. Okay, so we have potential date for February 25th if our facilitator is available, and we'll come up with the length of time. I wasn't suggesting it could, I think as long as there's a big lunch break, you know, or some kind of a break between the two, that we could do a morning and an afternoon, as long as we've got enough downtime. So, all right, with that, I think we are good to go.
Sandy,
Yes,
I would just like to thank you for regrouping and taking the time to read that material and allow us to move forward today. I really appreciate that.
you're welcome. I'm glad I thought of it, and I am a speed reader, so good. I'm glad we were able to move forward, and I feel good that we're looking at one final version at the next meeting, and we're still on track with everything. So that's great. And hopefully, Charlie maybe can comment on this. We will have a draft agricultural goals and policies, an updated draft. I would ask, it would be great if we could have a version that shows changes from the last draft, so that we could focus in on just looking at those parts. And if we could have it circulated, you know, more than just a couple days before the meeting, but maybe we get it ahead of time. And then to make sure that that's also made available to the public.
Yep. Yeah, we'll try and get it to you with the meeting materials. And if you haven't already, I recommend you looking at the ARC memo that was included with this meeting
Yeah.
packet. And send any comments my way if you have some on that document.
Okay.
But yeah, I can track changes and all that. So
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Good meeting. See you
Yeah,
soon.
very good. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, everyone.